If there's no objection, they'll stand as read or as recorded. Let me put it that way. All right. A couple of items that we need to go over today. We do have the chair of the park board did send us, I don't know if they sent everybody an email, but she did send me, and I'm sure Councilman Byrd, a list of things that they would like to offer as amendments to our ordinance. And we need to find a time that we can invite her and go over this. Is this something that the council would like to do at a strategic planning or during a committee meeting? Any thoughts or ideas? Committee? Okay. All right. Tell you what, let's give us a couple of weeks, Madam Clerk. What do our committees look like on the 18th? Do you know? That would give us the chair of the park a couple of weeks notice. Tell you, for right now, we'll just go ahead and schedule this for a public safety committee at our 3 o'clock time slot on the 18th. I do want to go ahead and address that so that we can possibly put any amendments that we need to in order. All right, that moves us down to the priority-based budgeting, and I'm just going to take both of these together, the ARP and infrastructure funding. And I know those two items are to be determined. Chief, do we have any update on like presentations of either one of those items?
Yes, I'm going to let our CFO talk a little bit about the priority-based budgeting item first, and then I'll come back around if he so chooses for me to talk about ARP.
Okay.
Well, look at that. That's the best timing I've ever seen. I was literally just going to say I would fully defer to Councilwoman Burrs on this, but now she's here. So I did meet with Councilwoman Burrs last week to discuss priority-based budgeting briefly, and I would seriously defer to her about the time for presenting any information on that to City Council. We can do it any time that you all please, whatever you would like, Councilwoman. Just for a general overview of priority-based budgeting.
Yeah, Councilwoman Hill, I'm assuming it has to do with one of these two items with the budget. Let me go to Councilwoman Burrs, and then we'll come back to you. Councilwoman Burrs, hit your line.
So we did meet at length, and what we talked about was empowering council from the very beginning, and letting the various council chairpersons meet with their counterpart in administration and get fully educated one-on-one, and not have to do it up here. Get fully educated one-on-one so that when it comes time for public input, the council person could be helpful in those ways as well. So instead of waiting till to April or May, we would be part of the process from the very beginning. The other thing we talked about was, does it make sense for us to do public input before there's a budget? And let me tell you where I'm going with this. I know it's a total paradigm shift, but we need to, I think, change things up and come into the 21st century. It would seem to me that every time we have public input sessions, and I think you all will agree, last time it was a disaster because the public input sessions didn't at all agree with what we, as representing our districts, knew were the issues. Mm-hmm. And the issues across the board from Stan's questionnaire are what they always are and what they should be. And that's safety, education, infrastructure, housing, all of that. So wouldn't it be wise, since we know those are already the issues, unless somebody has some issue here, to see how that's been addressed and then have input And we could do it as early, Brent, you said February or,
So the departments will have submitted their requests by mid-February. By March, we will have had, the executive leadership team will review and tweak some things. So, late March would be probably the best time for the committee chairs to meet with the departments to go through
I'm
budget
talking,
and then have,
so that's good.
Yeah.
So they're fully educated and can deal with their constituents. My colleagues have had to wait to the very end, and that's ridiculous. It should be from the very beginning. I'm talking about the other piece, the public input piece. Does that serve a function at the front end, the way we, having big meetings, and because we already know what the main concerns are. I would rather have public input once they have something to give that input against, before we start considering the budget, if that makes sense. So that's pretty much it, Mr. Chair. We spent about an hour and a half, and it's all geared toward enabling us, empowering us from the very beginning to be part of the process.
so the first vote would be scheduled in the first week of June on the budget.
Yes.
So public input sessions could occur, in terms of if we want to take a budget and perhaps do a presentation for a community forum and then get input on that, we could do that after April 20th, but way far in advance of when we normally do education.
And what makes that work, Mr. Chair, is that my counterpart, in this case it's Brent, but anybody's counterpart in administration will be meeting one-on-one, which is allowable. It's one-on-one, out of the range of camera,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, and really get educated so that Ike is the expert. He understands public works, or he understands that sort of thing, so that not only can he be the expert on the council, not just way at the end, that's ridiculous, it's already done, be the expert at the beginning. He can be responding to us. Same with Darren. He can be in planning, zoning, this sort of things. And it's not all done in the public forum, which it will at some point, but not at the beginning. So that we're as up to snuff on everything as the administration is. I think that if we work collaboratively, that makes much better sense than them presenting this thing and reacting to something we're seeing for the first time cold.
Okay.
Okay.
Councilwoman Hill?
I had a nuts and bolts question. We had received an email asking us to look at certain dates for budget input meetings. One of the two dates that Ken and I's district would have shared was yesterday, so it must not have happened. And the next one is coming up. So, I mean, that question may be overruled by Carol's thoughts, but I'll say I think the public appreciates opportunities for input early in the same way that the council appreciates early opportunities.
Thank you, Councilwoman Hill. I think that there might have been some confusion. So we sent out some dates, and then I think that we pushed them out a little bit. And so there may have been a follow-up email. I have to go and check, but there should have been the first date that would have been coming up would have been January 12th. And I think that we originally had an earlier set of dates, and then we worked with the council's office to try and schedule up some follow-ups. But let me go and
Yeah, if
figure
you
it
could resend that. I don't recall that.
out. Okay, I'll go look at it.
I may have filed it inadvertently.
Yep.
Yeah, I think what I was asked to look at is the 12th or 13th, and that.
That was for your district?
Well, I think what I have is 2 and 7, I guess, was going to join, or I don't know, maybe
I'd have to go back and look at the exact dates that were sent out to you all, but I believe that there was a later set of dates. We had initially set some aggressive expectations and then realized they weren't going to work. And then I think we communicated some additional dates to you all. But again, I'd have to go look. I don't have them with me.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I guess we need to get the dates cleared up. Maybe we can do that by 3:30.
Yes.
And then
Well,
at some point, we need to schedule council chairs with department heads. Then I guess it's sort of the next step we need to take.
If I may, Mr. Chair, once Brent gets his schedule firmed up,
Okay.
and the department heads are firm in their understanding, because it's a new system, are firm in their understanding, then we will sit one-on-one before everything goes forward and talk and represent I can right now tell you what the interests in my district are, okay? So, go get educated on all of that, so they become the experts, so they're proactive instead of reactive.
Okay.
And once that happens, then we can set forward on what, I think I have a schedule, but Brett and I, we may not even need 4 or 5 education sessions. I think we will have the education sessions simply because that's when the public really gets educated on things, at the education sessions. They have really nothing to respond to at this point.
Yeah.
Once we have the education sessions, I don't need to lead the one on planning and zoning. Darren does. And he's the expert. In other words, he's not up there asking questions as well. He's an expert in it, and he's able to respond equal to the administration.
Okay. Councilwoman Hill, did you have a follow-up?
yes. So what I was hearing Councilwoman Burrs suggest was that perhaps this budget cycle, the public input not be sought until there was a draft of the budget. Was I hearing you correctly? Okay. So I understand where you're coming from, that if you go to the public without a framework, the discussion can be less than productive.
That doesn't mean you can't have a district meeting.
Well, but getting public input on the budget, what I have seen from my work on the school board is that when it's done in the framework of an overall strategic plan, which in this case would be the administration's One Chattanooga plan, that a well-facilitated conversation around the priorities that the mayor knows that the mayor has could very well yield an important and helpful conversation early in this process with individual districts. So for example, districts 3 and 2 are grouped together, and I can absolutely see Ken and I both having neighborhood associations that would choose to participate in getting their needs heard early on and responding to the One Chattanooga plan, which potentially they haven't even really studied. So before we jump into the idea of not having public information sessions, I just encourage, now Brent is sitting down and everyone's chatting over there, but I guess I just want that to be a very intentional decision on the administration's part to keep or not keep those. And my vote would be to keep them and do them well, because I think they serve a purpose prior to the actual creation of the budget and the response to it, at which point I would be having a community meeting to discuss that budget. Thank you, that's all.
Councilwoman Burrs?
Would you want to have those before you yourself are educated? That's all I'm saying, is that we put them off till you yourself are educated.
Which is what we did last time. I had a meeting about the budget with my district, and Brent and firefighters, police chief all came. but it was after I myself had been.
So that's all I'm saying is that we don't do them now. We get you educated so that you can respond.
Well, they're two different things.
Mm.
There's input session on, here are my priorities as a neighborhood leader. And yes, we all have just gone through an election cycle and know our districts very well. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we spoke with everybody that has an opinion. So to set aside an hour and a half on a weeknight, I think is an appropriate thing to do.
So I think what we're talking about is the difference between the public giving input, then the public being educated. In other words, and I think what I hear Councilwoman Hill saying is let them give a chance for them to tell us what they would like to see. We put the budget together, then we go back out and say, here's what we've done. So,
And then you want input again from them, right?
well, I think at that point, it is what it is. It's an input session at the beginning, and then after it's formulated, it's an education session by the council
I
or
would
by each council person.
I would say too, it was our intention, but before I believe that Brent and Councilwoman Burr spoke, when we had planned these initial sessions, they were really for the public to have an opportunity to come together with the council members for those districts and talk about broad priorities to help inform the direction that we would take the budget. And then to the chairman's point, I think especially last year where we had a compressed timeline for the budget and we were coming in as a new administration, we did not do that sort of earlier big priorities because we were not in office yet. But I would certainly defer to council, but that was our original intention. I just wanted to point that out that these input sessions beforehand were really about a broad set of priorities to help us go and begin building a budget based off of what we heard. But again, defer to the council's
Would those
wishes.
follow the same format as the ones last year? Because they were kind of useless.
Which education?
Before you all came in,
Oh, right,
when we
yes.
had public input,
We would certainly change the format.
yeah, we had public input, which
Yes.
didn't register at all. And then my last question is, would you do it by Zoom or in person?
It would
Because
be,
the Zoom ones can be a bit not helpful.
I think we would have to watch Omicron, but it's our hope to do them in person.
Whatever the council chooses, Mr.
Well,
Chair, I'll follow.
and let me just say this, Councilwoman Burrs, and thinking about all this and going back over the years, once the budget comes out, and it is the mayor's budget, they put it together and present it, hopefully with input from the public and the council. I've seen that budget change very little
That was my point.
once it's put out. So the input needs to be up front, like you're saying. And then I think it's our job to educate after that. And then I don't think as far as input from the public, once it's presented, is going to be very helpful. I think it's more of our job just to educate. Here's what it is.
Would you agree? Would you agree that somewhere at the very beginning, we ourselves get educated so
Oh,
that
yeah,
we we
absolutely.
can speak as well as
Yeah.
the administration on what the issues are, what they,
Yeah.
so that the public education sessions, the ones that we do afterwards, like the 4 or 5 of them that are on camera, where everybody gets educated, are more showing that administration and council are
Work
working together
No, I'd agree
to
with
make that
that.
happen.
Yeah, I'd agree with that statement completely.
I will defer to whatever the council wants.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So we can, based on this conversation, we can work on an updated timeline that includes, some upfront input on priorities and a timeline that incorporates the committee chairs meeting with their counterparts, education sessions, and the vote timeline. We can work on an updated timeline to discuss with you, Mr. Chairman, and Councilwoman Burrs to come to some agreement, and then, push that out.
Okay. I mean, I
We could
think
do that by next
my,
week.
my comment about the budget would be similar to what I had about the ARP funds. Don't let the first time that I see how we're spending the money is when it's laying on my desk.
Well, that's what this is designed to do.
Yeah.
Way at the beginning.
I mean,
Um,
we need to have input at the beginning, and then so that when it hits our desk, we're not really
I
surprised.
think you'll see the new timeline way ahead. Right now, it's getting the new department heads educated because there's a lot of newness on everything, so that they can meet with their counterpart and get us as educated as they are.
Speaking of department heads, other chief, I thought our public works director was going to start January 1. I take it from that grimace, you thought he was too.
It's actually January 21st.
Oh, it's the 21st.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead and stay up there and talk to me about the ARP funds. I think we're through with our financial chief.
I
Or,
can,
are you handling those
well,
too?
Joda can talk about the more of the plan on the process for ARP, but I did want to just go ahead and mention that, our total allocation for ARP was $38.64 million. As of today, we've spent $4.5 million. That includes the administrative costs for the next 3 years that you all approved last week in the purchases. It also includes the purchase of the hotel and associated expenses with that. 500,000 for eviction prevention, 330,000 to the Regional Homeless Coalition. So that's what we've spent so far. There's still $34 million left. We need to finalize our calculation for revenue loss, which the consultant that's coming on board to help us with compliance and monitoring will help us do a final calculation so that we know how much we want to reserve or put back into various fund balances for revenue loss over the past 2 years. And then we'll have an amount, probably somewhere around $30 million, that we will have a robust process to spend that money. And Joda will talk about that.
Okay. Hey, and Councilman Ledford, I'll get to you. Does any of that money, is any of that money eligible for operation budget? Because you mentioned fund balances and things like that. Any of that money that we spent out of our operation that can go back into operational revenue?
Yeah, essentially, yes. I mean, at the end of the day, it all nets against fund balance. So either way, it can be a wash, but we have to report it to the federal government as in terms of revenue loss, not how much we've spent previously.
Okay.
If it's an amount of money that was spent within a certain time frame that meets the criteria, we can probably capture it, but there's a timeline associated with that we would have to evaluate.
Okay. Councilman Ledford?
Thank you, Chairman. This is for Brent. Don't forget, I think I'd asked for a breakdown on what the current rules were on
Yes.
usage for ARP, so we could all understand that better, because it's a bit complicated and I think still a little fluid.
Yes, so I think Joda was going to mention that.
Okay.
2 weeks from today, we plan to do an ARP presentation, which will include a summary of rules.
Perfect.
The final rules are projected to come out possibly in February, but the interim final rules, I mean, they've told us that we can broadly interpret those. And that's what I plan to do, is summarize 40 pages into 4 pages. And then we'll incorporate that into a larger discussion, which Joda will talk about.
Okay, and we may have covered this pre-Christmas, but are we looking at the ARP funds normally outside of the budget, as far as a total separate pool of funds? And hence the reason we hired the administrators for that particular job. And we'll move into the ARP rather quickly once we have the plan approved.
Yeah, so first part of your
I
question,
mean, we've
yes,
spent some of it already.
ARP dollars are going to sit completely separately from the
Yes.
operating budget and the capital budget. And when the appropriation that you all did was to authorize and appropriate the full $38.6 million, what that does is it allows us to move things around between the categories that it's eligible for. We still have to come back to council with every purchase over 25,000. But because you appropriated the money into a special fund, we don't have to come back and do a budget amendment every time, and we don't have to do a public hearing every time. So that authorized money is sitting in a special fund that we will spend in accordance with all the procurement rules that we have in place that allow you all to authorize and approve all expenditures over $25,000. That will be treated completely separate from the budget. We are, and Joda will mention this, we are going to allow administrators to submit ideas for spending some of the ARP funds, just like we want the community to submit ideas. And Joda can talk much more about that, but the administrators will have the ability to access some of those funds if it meets the criteria and aligns with the One Chattanooga strategy.
Last thing, I would hope when we are out and discussing this with the public, they understand that when we're constructing, or the administration is constructing the budget for next year, that they're not getting a substitute in the budget with the ARP, and that it is treated separately. I've already had folks come to me and say, well, you're already starting off with a nice little chunk of change in your budget next year. And I'm like, it's not exactly how that's going to work. I think we need to do a really good job at making sure folks understand that as we go through the budget process.
Yeah, that's a great point. We'll be sure to mention that. Also, we will have a completely separate ARP spending plan, which Joda will tell you all about the process for that.
Great. Chairman, thank you.
While we're on the subject of extra dollars, do we have any updates on our infrastructure dollars that could be coming down?
Yes. So the long and short of it is that we are waiting for the federal government to go ahead and provide guidance on exactly how we're going to be able to access those infrastructure dollars. My understanding is that most of it will flow through the Department of Transportation. As you know, Mayor Kelly was in Washington, and the major challenge around the infrastructure dollars, to be frank, is that most of it is going to go to the state of Tennessee, which will then be reallocated back to the city of Chattanooga on a formula or a competitive grant basis. And so there are some very limited direct to local allocations. For example, there's a direct to local allocation around energy efficiency projects. So upgrading and retrofitting buildings to be more energy efficient. I believe that is a direct allocation to Chattanooga, but the vast majority will go to the state of Tennessee's Department of Transportation.
And so will it be like writing a grant or whatever?
That's right.
We just
It'll be a competitive process.
give them a list of projects that we'd like to see, and then it's up to them to decide which ones they're going to fund, I guess.
That's
at that
correct.
point.
The vast majority will be a competitive grant process.
So there's no way of telling really how much we're going to get.
So there is some money that will come to the city of Chattanooga that will be allocated on a formula basis, and that's what we're still waiting on U.S. Department of Transportation for.
Okay. Follow up on that, Councilman Ledford?
It is, sir. Thank you. Joda, do you know if those funds are going to be limited to state-owned highways, much like we get the traditional, that's a city road, that's a county road, that's a state road? Do you know if any of the projects will be eligible?
So coming
For
back
all.
around to competitive grants, a lot of the competitive grant dollars will be applicable to local roads, but that will be a funding that we seek through the federal government. The state government piece, again, we're still waiting on exactly how DOT is going to allocate it to TDOT. But I do know that there is going to be some dollars reserved for municipalities and cities. That said, a lot of the money in the bipartisan infrastructure legislation does go to state highways.
Okay. And that's kind of where I was thinking, but
Yeah.
I have a couple projects if you'll get with me at some point.
For sure.
Thank you, Chairman.
All right. Any other questions for either chief on ARP funds, infrastructure dollars, priority-based budgeting? I'm not seeing any other lights at this time, fellas. You got one other thing?
I was going to ask if the council would prefer in some of the early engagement around the American Rescue Plan dollars, if you would be amenable or interested in us sending out either some sort of survey or a place for you to log specific projects that you might be interested in once we go through and do that education session around the eligibility status. I think that might be a productive way for you all to kind of begin to list items in your districts that whether they be broad priorities or specific projects that may be eligible. And again, in the education session, we can kind of walk through eligibility, but that's something I wanted to ask if you preferred sort of the survey approach or if you would prefer to talk about that sort of on a one-on-one basis. I'm open either way or to do both.
I'm going to speak for the council and say one-on-one.
Great. We can do both.
Well, there you go.
All right. Thank you, Council.
Okay.
And just to confirm, you guys are the strategic planning presentation for ARP eligibility and sort of just a broad overview of those dollars. Are you okay to do that in 2 weeks of strategic planning?
Yes. I'm seeing heads nod up and down. So
Great. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks. Councilman Byrd, prior to you arriving, I'm going to back up to the park ordinance, the amendments. We're looking at a committee date of January the 18th to handle that. I thought you would be amenable to that. Okay. If you would get with the chair of the park, let her know so that she can be preparing, and we'll have that presentation then. All right. On our future legislation, education sessions, we have a couple of items here that Councilwoman Coonrod wanted to discuss. We'll start with the short-term vacation rental enforcement. Councilwoman Coonrod, you want to take a stab at that, and we'll just go from there.
I thought per our last discussion that I think Chris or whomever was working on some things.
Okay. And I think he left, didn't he?
Yeah.
Chief,
So
do you
I
know if
could-
he's coming back or what?
I'm not sure. I'll go ahead and reach out to him and I'll check and see if he can come
Okay.
back.
All right, I'll tell you what, while we're doing that, let's if you want to, we'll move on down to the judge's salary. We'll cover that.
Oh, and I could reach out to Chris offline and see if he got time to meet and talk about it. There he is.
Oh, here he comes. Well, I think there are several on the council that are interested in some
yeah.
revisions to the short-term vacation rental, particularly with the enforcement. So,
Right.
Chris, we're on the short-term vacation rental enforcement. Is there any update, or have we had an opportunity to look at any of that yet?
Well, I've looked at what some other cities have done around the country, but that's as far as we've gotten. We're just in the research phase. There's nothing to propose. There's no new mayoral initiative on short-term vacation rentals as of yet. We're still in the gathering information phase.
Okay. Any ideas of when you may have something as far as what other cities are doing, what's being done around the country to take a look at what we might could do?
It's reasonable to think within a month we could have that to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Wait, Councilwoman Hill, question?
Thank you, Chair. So in my district, I'm not quite as concerned about enforcement as really just looking at the ordinance overall and considering if what we have is the best format for things coming to council, for example, but also how our short-term vacation rental processes align with an overall plan for keeping our neighborhoods a place where people in Chattanooga can afford to live, and balancing that with the economic generation or the economic benefits that they generate. So when we do begin to talk about it, I would prefer it not to simply be about punitive measures that other cities have taken, but in fact, how they look at this in a more holistic way.
Councilwoman, the mayor agrees 100%, and I think you'll be happy with what he proposes.
Terrific. Thank you.
Councilman Ledford?
Chairman, thank you. Chris, on that note, I would be very interested, since we've had this in place since 2017. I'd be very interested to hear from the public on how they think short-term vacation rental is going. I think it's pretty important. We see people come down in opposition, and we're hearing things in our districts. And I just think that as far as if we're going to look at this ordinance, I think it would be interesting to know the impact it's had and the opinions of the residents and people who live in this city that are impacted by it. I don't know how we do that, but
Well, as is often the case, Councilman, you and I are on the same page. Part of our process with this
did
body.
he say that publicly?
Well, no one's here today.
Okay.
So,
Chris, you are right. We tend to, yeah.
we often, almost always, are on the same page with things like this. And I think part of it wouldn't really be good education for the council if we didn't include that component, because right now, all the council during the last few years has been privy to is applicants and opposition in this meeting.
Right. Hearings.
Right. So nothing following that, as far as, how many of the permitted applicants are actually having issues, how many neighborhoods are actually having issues, how much of it is imagined and how much of it is real. So I think that data is going to be crucial when we present this information. How many complaints do we actually have? How many are actually found to be valid complaints? That sort of thing.
So I put a lot of value into the community survey that
Yes.
Office of Internal Audit does. But when does that go out? When does that survey go out? Probably way too late for us to address. End of the year?
Another year?
It's probably another year. Okay. I just found that I found their system to be pretty accurate and very enlightening at times, reaching out. I'm just trying to find a way, if we could brainstorm a little bit on how we can get some input on this.
Absolutely. And I imagine, as has been the case in the past, that a legislation like this coming from the council in the end would likely have a sunset clause on it of 1 year. So, Councilman, your point's well taken. I think that whatever you pass, you could put a sunset clause on it, and then during that time, another community survey will be released. So
Yeah.
that could give you the information you're looking for. we
Maybe, and
can
I'll reach
revisit
out
it.
to Stan and see if I can't, make that suggestion to add that in on the survey.
Great.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Sure. Councilman Byrd.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, hey, this is my issue that I definitely want to see the complaints that come in when a short-term vacation rental come up compared to the complaints that actually happens from them, noise complaints, fights,
Right.
partying, whatever. Just, I would like to compare the two, because a lot of times I just feel that the complaints of someone trying to get one will weigh way heavier than the actual complaints that's having. So I definitely want to see that. The other thing is, at the end of the day, the city of Chattanooga, what can we do? I would definitely want to know, like, can we put a lien on people's houses? Can we put somebody in jail? Can we, for this short-term vacation rental? I mean, I think that's a good hard look we need to think about. Like, what can we really do as a body? We could sit up here and throw all these hot topic words out and say all these cool things, but what can we really do to make these people either come into compliance? We can fine them $50 or $100 because you have an illegal one. And then I would like to see a comparison too. I like what Councilwoman Hill said about, keeping homes and stuff affordable, because in some of my neighborhoods, in my community, if it's not a short-term vacation rental, the rent's still going to be $2,500 a month for a 2-bedroom house. Nothing we can do about that. It's the world we live in. So those are a lot of things that I would like to hit on to just see what authority we really have, because I just don't see it at this point. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not really sure how it got to be about enforcement. I think the conversation we was having was about the saturation that was happening in specific neighborhoods. So it wasn't the conversation for it to be punitive. We were more concerned about, like in the Jefferson Heights area, how they had, it was saturated. Or, and we loosely keep using the term about affordable housing, but it's affordable to whoever can afford to live there. I mean, I can't afford to live in North Chattanooga, so why would I search there? So though it's when we talk about it, I mean, I think they're keeping it as reasonable and affordable for those who meet those income levels. So that's a different conversation. But I'm more interested in the saturation and particularly in for non-owner
Yeah.
occupied. Because I'm zoned to do a short-term vacation rental, and if I choose to, I could, I live there. So I don't think it's the concerns that if you own it and you operate in, it's more of a concern of investors coming from California purchasing homes and then using it as short-term vacation rental. Like I'm all for people, supplementing their income, but that is at this point it's a concern when you're buying blocks and only using it for that purpose. You're taking it away from our housing stock. So I would just like to see the plan for that, how we can reduce the saturation, not more so what we're doing on a punitive end, because we already have the results and stuff for that. I really appreciate it, Chris.
Councilwoman, I think whatever we present as updates or changes would include what most cities have done, which is a limit on the number of units per a certain geographic area, which prevents saturation.
But thanks for that clarification. Madam Clerk, if you would just note that really kind of what the topic discussion is non-owner occupied saturation rate or something along those lines. That'll give us a little bit more clarity, I think. Councilwoman Hill?
Yeah, I'm glad that Councilwoman Coonrod brought up saturation, because that's something that comes up a lot in anecdotal conversations. Is this neighborhood is saturated? We need a best practice way of measuring that, and then a thoughtful way of handling it. But to be able to say with confidence to a neighborhood, this is a healthy neighborhood number, percentage, and then how you handle complicate our ordinance, that's for sure, to say, all right, well, once come open, I don't want to turn us into taxi medallions kind of situation. So it's a nuanced conversation and an important one to have. Thanks. That's all.
Councilman Ledford?
This is a random thought and it's not completely baked, Chairman, but it was mentioned a moment ago about a sunset clause. And when we have the opportunity, and the chairman actually over the years has used the term, you might have used it in 2017 too, the nuclear option.
The nuclear, yeah.
Yeah, and you've used, and that always rang to me because it made sense. If it's just not working or if it needs a complete review, is there a way for us to think about any of these? And this is going to have an impact. So let's say it's not completely baked, but a way to allow a reset if we need to reset and come with a new plan. I mean, that has a lot of financial implications. Yeah, I know I'd get some heads on that.
I'm going to defer to our very competent city attorney on that legal question.
Yeah, but the certificates have to be. Well, that's okay. But I'm thinking it's working up here a little bit. But the certificates are how long? Yearly?
They're 1 year.
They're 1 year. So theoretically, when you
I'm sorry, Councilman, they're 1 year for issue, but then they have renewals that are not as stringent as the initial issuance.
okay, but
It's really a renewal.
Yes, sir.
And,
They are
and it
renewals.
can't be revoked unless there is a reason to revoke it, basically.
Correct.
Okay,
And it's
so it's-
violation based. Yes.
it's theoretically on an endless time loop.
Pretty much, yes.
Maybe we should.
It does have to be renewed.
Yeah.
It can be revoked through violation, but
Okay.
as long as you stay in compliance and you pay your renewal, it is endless.
So we created an endless, a forever situation, I guess.
Almost impossible to avoid that.
Okay.
Which
All right.
the archaic way that we were doing it
Mhm.
was even worse.
Yeah. No, I
There
totally-
was no takebacks at all.
Yeah, I
on
totally
it.
agree with you
Yeah.
there.
Okay.
I'm trying to find a way for us without causing financial
Yeah.
harm and whatnot,
Okay.
to be able to revisit. But
Thank
yeah,
you. Chris, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
All right, we will revisit this in, Madam Clerk, a month. Oh, got a lot. Councilwoman
And
Coonrod.
then, thank you, Chair. And I just really wanted to add to the discussion about like when we think about the complaints that's coming in, like we really need to start being mindful of the complaint in the areas, because in my community, I'm saturated with drug houses and gang houses. And the same traffic that people complain about when it comes to short-term vacation rental, the parties, the streets, the cars parked on the streets, and they assume, well, it's a short-term vacation rental, and really that is not, and it could lead to other, issues. So I mean, I'm concerned about the non-owner occupied saturation, just like I'm concerned about the drug houses and everything else that's saturating my community. So again, when we talk about enforcement, it's the same conversation. What can we do? So, I like it on the other end, policy wise, what can we create?
Okay. To Councilman Byrd's point a few minutes ago, we hear the complaints when somebody applies for one, and we're hearing the case, but just for public comment, people coming down, I don't remember hearing a lot or really any complaints of people coming down saying, hey, these short-term vacation rentals are causing havoc in my neighborhood. So, I mean, to your point, it's one thing to hear it when the case has been reviewed, but the follow-up doesn't seem to be effective. But I certainly agree that we need to look at the saturation rate of our neighborhoods. Councilwoman.
And also, Chair, when I brought it, we got to keep in mind, like, we don't get presented with the short-term vacation rentals that's operating as zoned R3 and R4. So we don't hear that. Like,
Well, there's some confusion about that, and and I tell you what, in a month, when we revisit that, we're gonna have a presentation on that, because that is not all short-term vacation rentals are through a permit, whether they're owner occupied or non-owner occupied. R3 and R4 has nothing to do with whether you can operate a short-term vacation rental or not. But we'll go over that in a month.
I got you.
Okay. Let's move on to Councilwoman Coonrod, the judicial salary.
I've thought about this considerably. I've had conversations with a variety of people, diverse group of people, and two concerns, that they voiced. One, it could come across like it's only personal against Judge Patey, and which is not even an issue at all. And then two, which was more concerning to me, was that we have an African American guy that's running for the city council seat, and they don't want it to appear as if we don't want him to get paid $180,000 if he wins. The ordinance isn't even about race or who won, because we don't determine who gets to be in this seat. As far as city council goes, it's determined by the people that vote for the seat. So it doesn't even matter who it is. A Hispanic can get in the race and they can very well win. That's not our issue to take up. The ordinance is solely just about the fact that we don't have general sessions provisions. That's all that it's about. It doesn't matter who the person is that's running for the seat or any of that. So Chip, with conversations I've had in the community, and just because of those things and other issues, like, I'm just gonna leave it on the table.
Okay, so we need to take this particular item off of our strategic planning, and we're just going to leave that ordinance. It has been tabled. We're just going to leave it on the table.
Yes.
Okay, Madam Clerk, if you would take the judicial salary off of our strategic planning agenda. Okay. All right. Thank you, ma'am. All right. Next item is and when it has city schools, it refers to our UTC contract as far as doing a study for, I think, separating the schools. Is that correct, Councilwoman Coonrod?
Yes.
You're still active.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So, I wanted to bring this discussion to City Council to talk about because of concerns with our school system and things that have been ongoing since we've merged with the Hamilton County Schools. And I wanted to propose that UTC provide us with some research so that we can make a decision on if there's something that we would like to get back in the business of. I mean, although, we could create a referendum, have it placed on the ballot and allow the citizens to vote for it, but that's not the approach that I would want to move to immediately. Like, I want us to really have some thoughtful conversation about our school system and particularly the city schools. And the things that I have wrote down, and it's concerning because we celebrate the T-VOS scores of the improvements of we're being a level 5 school. And I get that. And I share in that excitement too, because it shows the growth of what the schools, have done. But those T-VOS scores can be confusing at times and not really paint the correct picture. But when we think about our achievement levels and we thinking about our literacy rates, we have a problem within our community. So those things I want them to research. The teacher turnover rate within our low performing schools, which is pretty much the schools that are within our city. I mentioned the literacy rate, the student discipline rate in non-magnet schools before we merged and after we merged. In our schools, the diversity plan that they have in place, and our transfer rates, college readiness, and also the research year-round school, because Howard, not Hardy, at one point was a year-round school, and what we saw in that community is that the crime rate went down significantly in that area, in that community. So even when we're talking about the crime rates that we keep talking about, the violence that's happening in our communities and things like that, we have to consider our education systems. And if we're not preparing our kids in our school system, we have talked about the data time and time again. Our kids aren't ready for college. Our kids aren't ready for the workforce. It does us, our trade school that we so passionate about. Our kids aren't even going to be able to enter into the trade school if they can't read, if they can't do math enough to pass the test to enter into the school. So it's things that I think that we have to take consideration. I mean, I'm thankful for what the Hamilton County school system has done thus far, but since 1994, we've had the same schools, and probably before, on the priority list. We just call it a different name every time. So I just really would like to counsel, let's just take a hard look at it and see what research that we get and how much. Also to add, I missed one too. How much are we being assessed as far as with the city? How much money are we giving the county as far as with our city schools and with the upkeep? And then also if we can get the wealth of the community, of the schools, the community that's surrounding the schools. So the BEP formula, if that's something that we can calculate, because it's some issues within our schools. And if we're not educating our kids, I think that the city, we should be able to capture just the inner city schools and build from there.
All right, so you're offering this as a form of a proposal, and we would need, and as we've discussed prior to this, would need the consensus of the majority of the council in order to enter into a contract with UTC for this particular study. So, I do have some lights. We'll take some comments and then see if we have a consensus of the council to enter into a contract. Councilwoman Hill?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate your concerns, Councilwoman Coonrod, about literacy rates, and it's something that we as a council have identified as important to us within our strategic priorities. You're right that before the school systems merged, Chattanooga schools were failing. They were failing the students. They were very segregated. And in fact, that was one of the major reasons why the administration at the time decided to proceed with a merger, because we were under a federal lawsuit related to Brown versus Board of Education. 20 years later, our schools are still very segregated, especially as it relates to poverty. And the academic struggles continue. I am not without hope that academic progress is being made and can continue to be made. But I am certain that there's no magic wand that comes with changing which municipality or county is managing a system. In fact, the state has had.
Councilwoman, may I interrupt you for just a moment?
Sure.
Do you think that maybe before you continue on this, we might just talk for a second?
Me and you?
Mhm.
Okay.
Would that be okay if we took just a very brief recess?
Sure. I must be saying something very out of turn. Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what,
Well,
rather,
it's not out of turn. I'm not supposed to interrupt you. I'm supposed to let you go. But I thought that there might be a couple of points you might want to consider.
rather than, so we're running a little bit tight on time, rather than taking a recess, if y'all want to step out and just have a conversation, because I do have some other lights I think that people would like to
Okay.
weigh in on. If
Am I
You-
headed into a conflict of interest? No. Okay.
I mean, you can certainly choose to do what you would like to do, but
I mean, I don't think I was saying anything.
I'm just I'm gonna continue on with our meeting here. Councilwoman Burrs.
You know, one of the things we hear over and over again in our districts is education. And what, at least in my district, I will say over and over again, is we're not in charge of education, but these are our kids, and we should care about that. I don't think there's anything inappropriate, and I wouldn't just do inner city. The basic idea is not a bad one, all right? So listen to where I'm going with this. Over and over again, we hear in all our districts, I hear it in mine, education. And I think that people are going with hearsay, they're going with some actual outcomes, et cetera. I don't see there's a thing wrong in looking at whether or not there is a difference in outcomes in the city schools and the county schools. Is there a difference in outcomes with money allotted in the inner schools, the outer schools? How are decisions made? Because I think when you have incorrect information, I worked with a number of students at Brainerd who said they wanted more of a voice, and they wanted more of a voice in the diet that was served in their cafeteria because it was unhealthy. They allege that. I don't know whether it's true or not. So if anybody's taking notes on the press, please don't say that as fact, because that's not my point. My point is, if they really believe that the students at Westview or some other school are getting better food and better choice of healthy food, then that's a downer. That makes people feel second rate. So I think the questions we're looking at are questions of equity. And that's something absolutely a university can do. And I don't know. So you're looking at great outcomes. You're looking at resources available. You're looking at all kinds of things that have nothing to do with who's heading up the team. It has to do with absolute outcomes. And then how can we make it different? Because these are our kids. We do care about them. And we can't always just shrug and give it to the county. So, Councilwoman, I think your thoughts are very good. I think we could look at it and certainly ask the university to look at what are the differences in outcomes? What are the differences in resources? How are those differences? I'm a research nerd, right? So how are those differences in resources and outcomes impacting, if at all? So what's the level of impact? on the reason you go to school. And that's to earn a living, support yourself, take care of your family. You go to school, we'd love to think it's great enlightenment, but with this, there's very little enlightenment. So it's has to do with getting you ready to be a productive person in life and not a life loser. So I don't think it's a bad idea. I think that it would show that the city cares, not about who it falls under. And that's a perfect topic for a university to look at. My 2 cents.
Thank you. Council Vice Chair Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was more along the lines of whether we have enough detail to move forward, and then the cost. I mean, we're talking about possibly voting to have UTC look at something without knowing how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost. Are there specific items they're looking at? Is it just general? To Councilwoman Burz's point, there are a lot of valuable pieces of information that it would be very interesting to know from a research perspective, the differences. But is that what we're asking for? I'm not sure it is. Are we looking for information that would give us reason to believe that the city might want to move forward with taking over the school system? That's totally different than just researching the differences in the schools. I'd be, before I would support assigning a project like this for research, I would want to know the guidelines and basically the boundary of which they are supposed to be looking for, and then what we may be interested in doing with those results. Because getting the results back, most of us have a pretty good idea of what some of them are going to be. Councilwoman Coonrod didn't make up some of what she's concerned about, and neither have any of us. And I've seen it in schools across the district, not just in inner city schools. So I think we know a lot of that already. This would solidify it, but okay, then what? I'd just be kind of curious as to what we're really looking for here before we move forward with asking UTC to study something. And then I'd be prepared definitely to support it depending on what those specifics were that we were asking them to look at.
Okay. Let's go to Councilman Ledford.
Chairman, thank you. I'm going to kind of mirror a little bit what Vice Chairman and, first of all, Councilwoman Hill, would you like to have the floor again in your reemergence?
I think I'm right after you.
Okay, I'd be willing to yield.
She is in the queue.
Okay.
So.
So along the lines of that thinking, first of all, Councilwoman, thank you. You care, and you're willing to bring up a subject that I think is not only needed, but we need to find a way to address. And I think it's our moral responsibility for the love of our children. So thank you. My questions, though, when we go to UTC is how this is structured mechanically. There was a reason the city got out of the school system in '95. I'd like to know what that reason was, and I believe there's information out there that will point to why we did it. I would like to know approximately what does take over our schools mean. That's a very broad definition. But so I think we've started a great conversation here, and I think that you have spurred it correctly, because now we're all starting to think of the different levels. The end result for me in something like this would come out, if we're going to spend money to have UTC do anything, I want to know how the heck it's going to help our students who need it. Okay. And rearranging management doesn't necessarily mean to me that's the answer. Owning a building by the city or owning a building by the county doesn't mean to me that's necessarily the answer. I really want to dive into this with you, and I appreciate it. Councilwoman Burrs brought up some very good questions, and I'm solid behind what she was saying. And I think those are questions, the outcomes and how things are. And I'm wondering if we can't, and this is a part of where I think I'm very excited about a new superintendent. I'm excited about a new mayor, whoever that may be. I want, and I hope that mayor would reach out. And I know that our mayor, and I've heard him say it, is willing to work closer with the county and the education. I mean, I heard that on the campaign, and I've seen it improve. The more we work together and start bridging these divides, or this is your area, this is my area. I mean, for a long time, I've heard city isn't in the education business. Well, I completely disagree with that. No one's out of the education business. And I think where you're leading, I hope where you're leading us, the charge is for us to start thinking across those gaps. And I think there's an opportunity with a new mayor for the city, a new mayor for the county, a new superintendent, 2 new districts added to the council, 2 new school board members. I think this is a really good opportunity, but we need to be real specific. If we're going to get into UTC looking at something, we really need to know what we're going to ask them to look at. But I think we have an amazing opportunity here. And I thank you for bringing it up. I have a lot of unanswered questions at this point, but I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you, Chairman.
Councilman Hester, do you mind me going to Councilwoman Hill and then coming back to you? Let her finish up her line of questions. You go. Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So you brought up the concept of partnership, which was where I was headed. No, it's great. I wonder, Councilwoman Coonrod, if our question is not for UTC, tell us what it looks like to take over the schools, but is our question, help us understand how we as a city of Chattanooga can help improve the reading levels, the reading attainment, the graduation rate, the college placement, the job placement. Because there isn't a magic wand for management, I do not believe. And the goal at hand, I think that we all have, is our students performing better and being better prepared for the future. So as you put together your one pager for us to consider to vote on for the UTC research, I just ask that you consider that. Is it possible that the hypothesis is a little bit different in the work that we ask them to do? That's all. Thanks.
Councilman Hester, hit your button again, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Councilwoman Coonrod, for your concern, your love for our community. I agree with Professor Burrs that there should be stay on the outcome and the impact of that outcome. And if there is a correlationship between year-round schooling and a decrease in crime, then definitely that's something I want to entertain. There was a gentleman once said, learning doesn't stop because of summertime. I think sometimes the growth of some of the students are impeded because of them not being in school. I think that would increase the literacy too. If we did study that, see how if we had year-round learning in the schools, how it would be impactful. So I agree with that. If we could narrow the scope of what type of research we're going to have. Thank you.
Councilwoman Coonrod, I'll allow you to respond, but what I'm hearing as chair is before we're ready to kind of give an approval on a contract with UTC, I think the majority of the council is looking for a little bit of a one-pager that sort of outlines the parameters of what the study would look at, the cost of the study, and a timeline for the study. What I'm also hearing is maybe not so much a city taking back over the school system, but how best to partner with the county's efforts and going from there. Now, that may not be what you want to do at all, and you certainly have the opportunity to present the one pager to this body, whatever you want it to say, but that's just what I'm hearing. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate everybody's thoughtfulness in their questioning. What I'm really concerned about is the city of Chattanooga getting the city schools back and operating up. It has nothing to do with the management. It has everything to do with what I've outlined and I stated, because we just lost an excellent superintendent, Dr. Brian Johnson, who led us and did excellent things. But also what happened under his administration, we had a lot of students leaving our public school systems and going to charter schools. And there's more charter schools popping up and taking our students from public schools going into the charter school system. And there's a reason for that. Now, we've been having the same conversation about how the city can partner and how we're going to prepare people for the workforce. And we've created programs on top of programs. And we've talked about increasing the pay for our Head Start workers and investing in all these other programming. And still the results have remained the same. Not just that, a concern of mine also is that now our schools, even our school board, is now partisan, and our kids learning in our school system, it shouldn't be partisan. The city of Chattanooga is nonpartisan unless we vote to make that change. So I think it's a lot of stuff that I can come up with a one pager. I could work with the city attorney or draft an ordinance to be placed on the ballot, or however that the city council that we would like to move. But I just wanted to be clear is that my end result is that for us to regain control of our city schools. It's nothing personal against the Hamilton County school system. It's just that since the merger, I've noticed and seen things that's just not improving, in particular to our city schools. And when you look at our literacy rates and everything that I've already voiced, like, it's concerning. I mean, I'm sure several of us have kids that are in the school system, and I'm very passionate about education, and it matters what my 6-year-old granddaughter would, not having a choice in a decent school to send her and having to decide on a charter school or a private school to pay for it. That's concerning because our current education system and the schools that we're zoned for continue to be on the failing list. And that's concerning to me. Now, if we, and I'm a product of the Padale School, which is Chattanooga High School, and, some people graduated from that same system. Maybe that's a system we can research to look into to put them in all our schools and see the success rate of our students from that standpoint, if it's such a great, system to be a part of. But that's where I'm concerned at. So I'll ask Councilwoman Burrs, because I know you the research nerd on the council along with Darren Leffler, but if you wouldn't mind, if we can just carve out some time together and you can assist me with this to make sure, I'm addressing everything. Thank you.
Okay. And you should be able to have a one pager for us by our next strategic planning, right? Okay. Madam Clerk, let's put that back on strategic planning for 2 weeks. All right. Is there anything else? And we're running close on time. I would like to give you just a 10 or 15 minute break before our next meeting. Is there anything else that we need to cover during our strategic planning meeting before Councilwoman Coonrod?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if you want to cover it in this meeting or we could put it down for discussion on the next strategic planning meeting. So watching the news and everything and talking to Dr. Lambert and just the COVID numbers with this new variant is increasing rapidly, even more so than it was when it first started at the end of 2019. It's concerning. And going over our charter, it states that we at least have to meet at least twice a month. And I just want to propose to the council is that until we get through this winter season, and we can kind of hopefully see that the numbers go down some, if we can just begin to meet twice a month. And then if so, then like I say, once the numbers go down or we over the winter season, then we can reconvene to meet every week.
Okay. Well, we have just a few more minutes, and I'm happy to take any comments on Councilwoman Coonrod's proposal about meeting twice a week till the numbers go down. I tell you what, I mean twice a month. Good God, I don't want to meet twice a week for sure. I'm glad somebody stopped me on that one. I would like to, Councilwoman Coonrod, and that's not that's, I think it's a great idea. I would like to take a little bit of guidance from Dr. Lambert. I mean, since we have her in that position of what I guess we could, address safety wise as a council, as far as the public goes, a little bit of guidance from a medical professional, I think would be in order.
I'm happy to have Dr. Lambert come in and speak with you all
Okay.
about, what the possibilities would be.
Okay. I tell you what, we'll definitely have that scheduled for our next strategic planning. But, if in the meantime, the numbers look like that we need to do that, I mean, we can always, the prerogative of the chair, I guess, go to a 2-week, to a month meeting if it looks like we need to. Thanks for bringing that up. Anything else needs to come before this council during strategic planning before we adjourn for our 3:30? If not, we'll see you at 3:30.